Yes, I am.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Radio Free Cannabis. Coming to you from high in the hills of Oakland, California, we are the voice of the global cannabis freedom movement. Translated into 195 different languages via the YouTube auto translate function. And if you like this content, please remember to subscribe and share on the YouTube channel. Quick shout out to my friends at Liberty Hemp for these very cool high-line hemp face masks, antiviral, natural wicking properties. Thanks a lot for your comments and suggestions. Please keep them coming in so we can keep on tooling this show to meet your interest and meet your needs. Today, I'm going to have as my guests two of the boldest and strongest leaders of the cannabis movement and industry in their respective countries, Canada and Mexico. So with me, we will have three countries present for this conversation. And what we're going to be doing is just taking a look at the process of reform and industry building across these three countries, how each country and the developments in each country has influenced the developments in the other country. Of course, in 1937, the United States made cannabis legal all across the country. And starting in the early 1960s, went on a concerted and very determined and vicious campaign to force other countries all around the world to make cannabis illegal, if it wasn't illegal there yet, and to increase the penalties and enforcement of those laws. Now, since 1991, we've begun to see the rolling back of this global prohibition of cannabis. It started with the passage of Proposition P in San Francisco by my good friend Dennis Perone. Rest in power and love, Dennis, who was a Vietnam vet and gay man who really started and kicked off the medical cannabis movement and passed that very first medical cannabis law. Since then, over the course of about 30 years, we've seen the cannabis reform movement spread from that small beachhead all across the United States. There's about a dozen states now where cannabis is fully legal. Most of the rest of the states in the United States have made medical cannabis legal. We've seen a great deal of change all around the world. Europe now has medical cannabis laws in much of Europe. Lebanon, just a couple of weeks ago, became the first Middle Eastern country to move towards substantial reform of their cannabis laws. And of course, today we'll be talking about what's going on in Canada and Mexico, trying to understand this process of how reform and industry building is spreading around the world. And really, our main object here is going to be figuring out how we can accelerate it, how we can move this movement more rapidly around the world, how each of us in our respective countries can help the efforts of our fellow activists and entrepreneurs in other parts of the world. So today I have with me Abby Roach. Abby is a longtime cannabis entrepreneur and activist out of Canada. She's known best probably as the founder of the Hot Box Cafe, which for 20 plus years has been an oasis of cannabis freedom in Toronto, Canada. She now has completed a very interesting transition and is a senior product specialist for the government of Ontario, Canada, helping them find the very best cannabis products to supply to licensed dispensaries in the province of Ontario. Lorena Beltran is from Mexico. Lorena is also an activist and an entrepreneur with a long history in cannabis. We'll get to explore that a little bit further. Lorena is best known as being the founder and CEO of Cannabis Latino conference in Mexico, which I attended last year. No, did I get that wrong?
It's Cannabis Salud.
Lorena is the founder and CEO of Cannabis Salute. I went to so many different cannabis conferences last year, and it was such a wonderful time that they've kind of blended together. But the conference that Lorena put on in Mexico City was a gathering of both business leaders and scientists and medical professionals, really focused on sharing knowledge and helping Mexico move forward with its reform. And let me start with you, Lorena. If you could maybe just tell us how this all started for you. When was the first time that you heard that there was such a thing as a cannabis reform movement, and how did you decide to engage with it?
Thank you, Steve. Everything started in 2015. I was working in a company in Colorado, and we had the visit of a Mexican family. They were looking for a product to bring it, they were going to bring it legally into Mexico without a law, no regulation, nothing whatsoever. So they asked us for help to bring the documents they needed in order to take their case to court and be able to bring a CBD product for their little girl who was suffering from epilepsy. So that was the beginning of the activism to push for a legislation for medical cannabis in Mexico. Me being the only Mexican in this company in Colorado, I was able to help the family, and we just started this journey informing and educating society in Mexico and of course legislators. So in 2015 we started traveling, I started traveling back to Mexico to give conferences inside the Senate, inside the Mexican Congress. So that's where the real activism started towards the legalization of medical cannabis. And it was 2 years of a lot of work, a lot of lobbying. And we were able to help pass the first medical cannabis law in 2017. So after that passed, then I decided to move back to Mexico. And that same year, we founded Cannabis Salud as the first international medical cannabis congress in this country. So from there, we took the responsibility to educate our country, from media to legislators to patients to doctors. And after that, we were waiting a long time for a regulation to be published from that law. So that's how everything started in the legal process in Mexico. It was 2015 with the little girl winning in the court, and they were able to bring the product legally for the first time. And then having this first law in 2017. And from there, you know, we continue doing lobbying and education. And yeah, Mexico is still, you know, a little bit in the limbo, but we're moving forward.
Yeah, Mexico's clearly moving forward now. And Lorena, just to move a little bit before that, tell me when you first started hearing about legal cannabis, such a thing as legalized cannabis.
Right. Well, I'm from Chihuahua, Mexico, the north part of Mexico, and we have a border with Texas. So I will work right on Texas, El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez in Chihuahua, and it's still considered one of the most dangerous borders in the whole world. So when I started hearing about the legalization of cannabis was around 2010 when I heard something about medical cannabis being legal in Colorado, because I have family in Colorado. So I will follow the news of that state. And after leaving during really tough years in the border, seeing the war on drugs pretty harsh, and seeing all the violence around, we got very scared. It became a ghost town where we were leaving. So being a single mom, I just decided to move to Colorado with my family. And a few years after, we have the legalization of recreational cannabis. That right there, it was an idea that just, you know, exploded in my mind, because we were having all these problems in Mexico people fighting and killing each other because of the drug trafficking, including cannabis. And then here I am in a state where now dispensaries are in every corner selling cannabis, you know, and then we have the tax part and all those taxes going to education and health. And I was like, this is great. We need to do something about all this in Mexico. So that's when I decided, you know, to learn everything about the industry, because I always knew I was going to go back to Mexico and try to legalize cannabis. And, you know, I was looking at it as the first step to bring peace into my country. Of course, I knew it was not going to solve all of our problems, but it was the first step forward, you know, into that direction. And that's how I learned about legalization, thanks to Colorado.
Really interesting. So, you know, even in Mexico, you heard about the cannabis reform movement, and then you were basically displaced by the war on drugs and the underground trade. Go to Colorado and there experience firsthand legalization and see the obvious application to Mexico. A really interesting, just in your own personal story, the dynamics of various different countries. Abby, same question to you. You know, when did this idea of legalizing cannabis first come to your attention, and how did you first engage?
I started out as a really young woman with a lot of spunk and a lot of great ideas, and I didn't know very much about legal anything. I just knew that I really enjoyed cannabis, and I really wanted to get into it. It was 2000, and it was kind of counterculture at the time, and I opened a little head shop in Toronto that was called Roach. And as I progressed in my years, the laws started to change. So in 2001, the Terry Parker decision, which made medical marijuana in Canada legal, essentially, occurred. And that triggered the MMAR, which made medical marijuana legal. And in 2003, there were several legal proceedings that happened, as well as the Christian government trying to legalize cannabis, and they failed. And then there was a possession charge that had gone through, and the argument was you can't have cannabis be legal for one person without amending the legal rights of everyone. You have to amend the Cannabis Act, right? Or the Drug Act. And cannabis possession became de facto legal in the province of Ontario. And I, at the time, decided to open up the Hot Box, which was a lounge. And this was after visiting BC, and I went to a place called Blunt Brothers. I went to Jamaica. I experienced for the first time a culture where really you know, the consumption of cannabis was very much a part of people's everyday lives. And I took those two concepts and came back to Toronto and expanded Roachorama into a lounge with a store. And as time went on, obviously, you know, laws were changing, things were shifting, and advocacy really became a part of staying alive. How do I keep my business alive? And utilizing, moving my business forward and utilizing advocacy to move that business forward, we sort of moved the needle on where, you know, where possession stood and how people felt and social concepts around the normalization of cannabis. And then in 2016, when the Trudeau, you know, Trudeau ran for prime minister, he ran heavily on a platform of legalization, and you know, that was an incredible campaign to watch Canadians get behind the idea of legalization. After at that point, I'd been in business for 16 years. I fought, you know, bylaw inspectors and police and all kinds of levels of government. And at that point, I'd been through 3 different levels of government changing as well, 3 times. So we had municipal, federal, provincial governments in 16 years. Every 4 to 6 years, they change. So you constantly have to pick and choose your battles of where you're going to go. And all of a sudden, Canadian society came behind the Liberal Party and said, yeah, you know, I support this. And they won on a platform of legalization. And in 2018, cannabis was legalized. So what a journey. Amazing.
Yeah, and of course, I was sort of experiencing this journey a little bit from the other side of the border. Here in the United States, in California, we really kicked off the movement for medical cannabis in 1991. It took us
Mm.
until 1996 to actually get a state law passed. But then we kind of stalled a little bit, and it was right around then that Canada started coming on, and we saw this major case in 1981. How was it from the other side of the border, Abby? Were Canadians watching what was going on in the United States? Did it influence the movement there?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when Colorado legalized, watching CNN and going, wow, like incredible that this managed to happen. And then watching it state by state falling. And by the time that the Trudeau, government came into power, we knew that this was it. This was the end. And now that Canada's taken the role of being the first G7, G20 country to federally legalize, following the steps of US states. I know there was a lot of consultation being done. I hosted a few people from the US side coming up to check out what we were doing prior to legalization. And then I know our counterparts from Canada flew down to, California, Colorado, and really in Washington State, and really checked out how they did it, what was happening. And I think there were so many lessons that were learned on both sides of what went wrong and what went right. So I think, not only did the advocates and the activists watch what was happening on the other side of the border, but I think the politicians were watching very, very closely as well. And I think it really gave rise to the concept that a political party could run on a platform of legalization and get the majority of Canadian support.
Thanks, Abby. Well, we know, of course, in Canada, cannabis is completely legal now, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Lorena, maybe you could just update us briefly on what the current situation is in Mexico and where you see it going.
Right now, there's a lot of confusion around what's happening in Mexico. So to be brief and clear, we have two scenarios. We have a law that passed in 2017 for medical cannabis. This means that we can import medical cannabis products, and we can also cultivate and manufacture products for medical purposes. Also, cultivation is allowed for research. That's it. We don't have a regulation published on this law. That's why we haven't been able to commercialize legally, completely legal in Mexico, even though we have a law, but it lacks a regulation. And it's been over 3 years that we have been waiting for this regulation to be published. The Supreme Court ruled the health ministry to publish this regulation in August. However, because of the pandemic and this whole situation that we're living, the health ministry asked for an extra month. So they should be publishing the regulation of the law of 2017 on September 2020. Hopefully they don't push it again. The second scenario, we have a proposed bill that it's been discussed in the Senate since 2018. This proposed bill will allow us to regulate all the uses of cannabis, medical, recreational, and of course, industrial hemp. So this proposed bill was voted in general terms. That's how we call it in Mexico. They voted in the Senate and see in general terms if everybody agrees with this proposed bill. It was voted this last March 2020, and it was approved in general terms. So the next step was to approve this proposed bill in detail. So the senators were gonna go article by article and just make a few modifications in order to take this proposed bill into the Cámara de Diputados, the deputy camera, right? And after that, this bill, it's going to be published, and then we have 180 days to publish the regulation of the law. So again, because of the situation of the pandemic, they weren't able to vote again on this law, just to see the details of the article. So now they push it to vote between September and December. So hopefully this bill passes during those months at the end of the year, because that will allow us to fully produce cannabis in Mexico for all harvest, manufacture, commercialization, import, export, for medical and recreational, have dispensaries, also a plant limit per person to have our own plants at home for personal consumption. This bill also talks about associations, which are like cannabis clubs. So the whole package. So we're very excited about this and waiting for the Senate to vote again on this proposed bill towards the end of this year. So those are the two scenarios we have in Mexico right now.
Well, that's good news. The process of reform seems to be continuing to unfold in Mexico through various different means and through various different levels of bureaucracy. Lorena, could you talk a little bit about how events in Canada and in the United States have influenced the process of reform in Mexico?
Yes. So I know Mexico, our legislators, when they were writing this proposed bill and the discussions that have been happening for the last 2 years, definitely they were looking at the regulation of Uruguay, of the United States, and of Canada. So if you read our proposed bill, it's pretty much like a copy paste of different things from some states in the United States and mainly Canada. Canada and Uruguay are our main reference because are the only two countries that have a federal regulation, right? So because Mexico wants to regulate all the uses of cannabis, that's why these two countries were mainly the point of reference, because Mexico is going to legalize at a federal level as well. So, but definitely United States has been a country that our legislators have been traveling to a lot, you know, to see how everything works from cultivation to final product, tracking systems, you know, mainly in Colorado and California. But definitely Canada has the greatest influence on our regulation. I know legislators have traveled to this country as well. And mainly because, you know, we hear on the news everything about the public companies, and this whole movement of public companies started or just grew so much in Canada. So we think that, you know, the main investors are going to come from Canada. So that's also has influenced us a lot. We already seen the biggest Canadian public companies coming to Mexico, sitting down at the Senate, sharing their experiences, but also trying, you know, to have one foot in Mexico already. You know, we've seen these Canadian companies trying to do lobbying, and because they have the resources, we know these public companies, you know, have a lot of investors and they have money. So unfortunately, they don't know exactly how Mexico works. So they just, you know, try to do the things the way they do it in Canada. So it just hasn't worked for them. But definitely public companies, you know, have been a spark for many other companies in Mexico, you know, to push and move forward and do a more intense lobbying, because we need these investments as well in Mexico, right? So, but definitely there's a lot of wrong information that's coming from Canada as well, because we also see on the news that a lot of these companies are failing. So there's a lot of confusion right now in Mexico. Are they doing the right thing? You know, because they were able to get all these investors in their public companies, but then we see their numbers and a lot of them are failing. And what should Mexico do? Are we a did we take the right decision to copy paste a lot of the regulation that Canada has? Because it seems that no regulation whatsoever in the world has worked perfectly. There are a lot of mistakes, and I think Mexico needs to be careful when it looks at other regulations.
I would echo that caution. I think that it's very, very important as we unroll the process of reform around the world that we learn from what's happening in various different places. In California today, we have basically a failed legalization effort because of overtaxation, because of overregulation. And I think there's some important lessons for other activists around the world to learn from that. But since you mentioned the Canadian public companies, let me turn to Abby and let's start putting our arms around this elephant in the room, Abby. What role do you see the Canadian public companies having played in the process of reform?
I have this conversation a lot. I'm going to take the question back a couple of steps. So, a lot of people are like, oh, craft and this and it. It's very, very important that small producers get into the legal market 100%. And I think what happened in Canada is because we had to serve an entire federal country from coast to coast. Canada is a very large country, one of the biggest in the world. It took sense, it made sense to the Canadian government to take the big companies that were servicing the medical marijuana market and license them to sell commercially to the adult use market. And in order to provide enough cannabis to the adult use market, it did make sense. But what happened is that it created sort of a bubble, this imaginary bubble of if we the bigger we get, the more money we're going to make. And that's not necessarily true. And now you're seeing 2 years later, those companies that we speak of that were huge companies that took in tons of investor money, that investor money has to make money back. And when it's not making money back, those shares convert and different people take the helms of those companies. And I think right now what's happening is that those big companies are being reined in by the investors, saying you don't need 30 million square feet of grow space. You probably need a quarter of that and grow as you need to. You don't need to have all that working. You don't need to be in 100 different countries. You probably need to focus on the markets that you're in right now and make money out of that and then grow from there. So you're seeing a huge shift right now in the Canadian market. And as I say that, we also have micro processing, which is and micro cultivation and nursery licenses that came into play in the last year, which allow for smaller cultivators, so for micros and smaller people cultivating smaller processors, to come into the field and level it out. So now you're seeing companies that have fantastic product. They don't have as much square footage, they don't have as much money, but they're producing fantastic product with a real focus on the consumer and a real keen eye, and they don't have that fear of the legacy market where they're not trying to phase it out. They're trying to be inclusive or come out of the legacy market. So they're bringing that expertise and that knowledge of how to grow, how to process, and also the customer. So there's a really big shift. And I think you're going to see on the world stage, those big companies that were trying to get into every single, every single government, every single sort of sector, they're not going to go there anymore. I think right now the focus is on making it work and making the companies that they have make money where they are. So some of the big boys that you imagine are going to come in and invest in they're already on phase 3 of investment, and those investors want their money back and they want to make it work.
I think that we're seeing this industry and this movement playing out, and nothing huge. And the cannabis industry, I think one day is going to be, by dollar value, the largest industry in the world. Nothing that big happens all at once. There's various different iterations, and we learn and we move forward. From my point of view as a Californian, as an American, the role of the Canadian public corporations and corporate cannabis in general has it's really been a mixed blessing, or a two-edged sword, depending on how you want to look at it. On the one hand, the legitimacy that comes from having cannabis companies that are traded on the Canadian public exchanges and the amount of capital that can be raised on those exchanges has really supercharged growth in both California and across the United States. And it has created companies, like Acreage, for example, which now has John Boehner, who was an extremely anti-cannabis politician, Speaker of the House for the Republican Party in the United States for many years, one of our most determined opponents, who now is a cannabis advocate. And so that kind of supercharging of reform, I think, is important, and I appreciate corporate cannabis for its ability to do that all around the world. I think if we really want cannabis to be in the mainstream of commerce, if we really want this plant to get into the hands of everybody around the world who needs it, corporate cannabis is a necessity. It's something that must happen. But at the same time, I have a concern. And the concern goes to what you were talking about, Abby, that there's a cast of musical chairs in the large publicly traded companies. And the people who occupy those chairs, sooner or later, are people who are going to be most concerned with, and in fact have legal obligations to be prioritizing shareholder return. And many of those people know a lot about public markets. They may know a lot about petroleum or gold mining, but many of them have come to cannabis quite recently. And the challenge for me is that now they are in charge of a vast amount of media, a vast amount of marketing, a vast amount of the ability to tell the story of cannabis around the world now lies in the hands of corporate players. And for the most part, I don't think that those folks really know the story of cannabis well enough or understand the plant well enough to adequately perform that teaching function. So hopefully, moving forward, we'll continue to see this process of integration. It's so wonderful to me to see my friend, a hardcore cannabis lover and activist, Abby Roach, now bringing her influence to bear in the government of Ontario. It's really a wonderful thing. Let's think a little bit now about how we can make this better. Lorena, let me turn to you. Do you have any thoughts about how the level of international cooperation that we've been experiencing in the movement and the industry could be enhanced? Are there ways that those of us here in the United States, those of us in Canada, and around the world potentially could be of assistance to you in Mexico as you're in the earlier stages of your reform effort?
Yes, definitely. We need a lot of help. We need more international experience, especially of those countries and states in the United States that already have a regulation in place. We need to know what is working in those countries and what is not. And also, it will be very important to have an opinion, suggestions, recommendations for our country in terms of what would be best when you consider all the different issues that we confront here in Mexico when it comes to government corruption, along with the organized crime, the the war on drugs, that still going on here in Mexico, as well as the negative stigma that most of our society still has around this plant. And it's normal because we talk about cannabis, marijuana, and people still think, violence, blood, how is this really going to work, benefit our country? So if we can have that experience, from leaders in the industry around the world, it will definitely help us so much to clarify doubts, to work together on a strategy for Mexico, because everybody's looking at Mexico as a potential, as one of the main producers of cannabis, as one of the main countries to really have a successful industry. But I think we definitely need to work together because we have so much potential. We see the interest of public companies in Canada, of companies in Colombia as well, companies in the United States, in Europe, that really, really want to get into Mexico, that are so ready to invest, that really want to start working here. But again, we need to make sure that all these people agree to work hand in hand with Mexico for the Mexicans, first of all, for our domestic market, you know, for our society. If you want to come and do business in Mexico, is because you really think that this is going to benefit in many different ways, in a social impact, economic impact, and environmental impact, right? Mexico doesn't need just another company that just wants to take over and that just wants to buy the land of our small farmers, because there's a huge need in our country for employment, to reactivate agriculture. So this is such a good opportunity for Mexico. It's a huge opportunity, the cannabis industry. Mexico is known, you know, around the world to have the best marijuana, which is not true, but, you know, for many generations, this has been growing in Mexico, you know, and it's been the main business for these small farmers. So yeah, definitely international help for sure, but not just to come and take over, but to really establish real solutions with us for our country, because it's hard. It's hard. That's why regulation has been taking so many years, because it's not easy to deal with corruption and organized crime. You know, we have to be very careful, but at the same time, as I mentioned, this can really, really benefit Mexico. And if it benefits Mexico, you know, then it will have an effect around the world, because we can be an example for those countries that are not doing the right thing for their society.
No, both of you are very good friends of mine. And so I know that both of you are concerned about the social impact of the cannabis industry. How do we build an industry that is just, that is sustainable? And Lorena, you were touching on that in Mexico. Abby, coming from the perspective of a country where the process of reform is a bit further along, do you have any suggestions on how Mexico might be able to better structure its industry, some things that it might be able to do to try and help us move towards this, not just, you know, new industry, but really a new kind of industry?
Definitely. So, you know, we have what formerly NAFTA. We now have a new free trade agreement between all three countries. I think really key and important as the US goes into federal legalization, which I strongly believe that no matter if it's a Republican or Democrat next, it's going to happen. The cards are written into the future, right? And Mexico is coming along as well. I think it's really important that we structure a sort of a uniform industry that matches all three countries. So we don't have regulations that are vastly different, and also standards that are vastly different. This will create a much easier path towards import and export and trade between the three countries. That's number one, which opens up to a much larger scale, which opens up the industry to far more people. When you have a very small industry, it really creates a bubble that is pushed by money and not really by quality or knowledge. So really important that we create an industry, number one, that's open. Number two, important that we push the industry to be inclusive of the people who were in it prior. You know, some of the most successful companies out there and the most successful brands that I see in Canada are ones that really included people from the legacy market, ones who have diverse boards, ones who have people from all different colors and walks of life. It's important that your customers, no matter what industry you're in, and this doesn't just stand for cannabis, this goes for shoes, clothes, food, it's important that your consumer can relate to your product and to your brand and to your company in order to be successful. And I think this is a lesson beyond regulations. This is a lesson to actual commercialization of cannabis as a consumer packaged good, right? If you create an inclusive company, if you create an inclusive brand, if you have people that look like a lot of different people and come from different backgrounds, not only do you diversify your board and your employees, but you diversify the opinions and the views that stand behind your brand. And that's really important considering we come from a absolutely international continent, right? It's a continent of immigrants. We come from all over the place, all over the world. So it's important that we hone that. And cannabis is such a communal, and it's just so communal. We just need to be able to carry that into the commercial part and the regulatory part of cannabis. It's when I go to work every day now, when I owned the hot box, diversity was extremely important to me. It's important to me that my staff look like the people who they served and could share experiences and backgrounds with them. And when I walk into my work now, I remember the first day, it was so amazing to me. I work for a government entity right now. It is so diverse. They really have taken cannabis and the industry to where it should be. There's people from all different colors, all different walks of life. Most of our senior leadership team are women. And then they brought me in, which was a shocker, to bring in a Jewish woman of Israeli descent who is like a whatever, but with 20 years of experience in cannabis in the legacy market. And they brought me in, even though I don't have a university education, they brought me in on a senior level because I have 20 years of experience and I understand the consumer. And that's what I would recommend for every company and every government to do, is include the people that built this and know the industry, they understand the consumers, and also be inclusive of diverse opinions, backgrounds, and people.
Yeah, I think that you're touching on something that's really important. There's a hope amongst the cannabis community, I think even beyond the cannabis community, that the industry that we're building will create companies, put companies out in the field that will give consumers the opportunity to vote with their dollars, to be able to support those companies who really implement the values that cannabis teaches us into their business operations. I certainly hope that that happens moving into the future, but it depends on a highly educated, activated, and committed cannabis consumer base. So if you consume cannabis and you're listening to this podcast, make sure that you know, to the degree you can, where your cannabis comes from, who's making it, how are the workers that are producing that cannabis being treated, what's the environmental impact of that cannabis operation, how is the money that's being made from it spread around, is the company diverse, does it have women involved in leadership positions, does it have indigenous people, people of color? These are the kinds of questions that the cannabis consumer base all around the world needs to be asking if we really want to realize this huge hope, this huge potential of the cannabis industry. Lorena, let me turn to you. I know that here in the United States, we have attempted to use the legislative process, the licensing process, to try and drive a more diverse, more sustainable, more just cannabis industry. Are there any efforts like that going on in Mexico? Any efforts to include indigenous communities or small landholders or other people who, women for that matter, who are generally not terribly well represented in the mainstream of Mexican commerce?
Yes, and we can see that inclusion in the proposed bill. the one that's going to be voted towards the end of the year. In this proposed bill, we see that legislators are considering small and medium farmers as priority when it comes to getting licenses for cultivation. There's an article in this proposed bill that says that regular companies like mine or myself, I'm not able to be vertically integrated, meaning that I cannot get more than one license per company, which is also a little bit complicated, you know, when you're starting an industry in a country like Mexico, because if I only get a license to grow, we all know if we have a grow, an exterior grow, anything can happen because we cannot control the environment and we can lose, for example, half of the crop. And in order to recover that investment, it would be great if I can, you know, process that plant into oil and sell that in order to recover what I invested in my grow. However, I cannot do that as how the proposed bill is right now. That's subject to change, hopefully. But small farmers are able to get all the licenses. And we have 5 types of licenses on this proposed bill, which is for cultivation, manufacturing, commercialization. And commercialization means dispensaries, and import and export license, and the research license. So these small farmers and the people that have been in this industry, I mean, in the illegal space, are gonna be given this opportunity to be vertically integrated, which is great, you know, for them. Of course, they're gonna need a lot of guidance because these groups, the only thing they know mainly is to grow. Then, you know, to be vertically integrated, they need to have the knowledge on the rest of the processes, and also to be able to explore the international markets and be able to export and stuff. So I know there's going to be a mechanism where we all going to have to work together, but definitely for me, it's great that they can be vertically integrated. They're also talking about a percentage of the plant material that needs to be bought in these areas where small farmers are cultivating. For example, again, my company, if I'm producing X amount of hectares, a 20% I need to buy it from a small farmer. Just like Colombia, but Colombia is 10% that you need to buy from small farmers. But we see in Colombia that this hasn't worked. Like, people are not buying this 10% from small farmers or indigenous communities. Or if they're buying it, they're just throwing it away because they think it's not compliant or it's not a plant material that's going to work for the purpose of the company, which is pretty sad, because if the regulation is establishing that, it's to work together and really help these communities and the indigenous groups. It's not just to, okay, well, check, I'm going to do what the law says, but, you know, just on the surface, not really getting involved in having, you know, a better industry for the country. So I see that on the proposed bill. I think there's still many things that need to be considered, like also giving priority to women, you know, because at the end of the day, if you look back, you know, in the whole history of this legislative process, the main people that have been moving the most important pieces in this process have been women. So for example, just briefly, the first person to get an import permit for a medical product was the little girl Grace, right? Of course, through the help of her family, but it was news all over the world, mainly in Mexico. The little girl Grace got the first import permit. That opened up, you know, the real activism, and it helped us push for a law that was published in 2017. Then we have a women which is Olga Sanchez Cordero, who was the one that proposed the bill that it's been discussed in the Senate. And then we have, she was also the first person to approve in the Supreme Court, because before Olga Sanchez was a senator, she was a judge in the Supreme Court. So she was the first one to approve a permit for a group of people to grow their plants at home. So thanks to that, we have a jurisdiction. So now it's unconstitutional not to let us grow our plants at home for personal consumption. And that was this woman, Olga Sanchez. And then we have this big organization, nonprofit foundations as well, that have been doing the strongest lobbying in the Senate, and all the leaders of these organizations are women. So that makes me really happy, and hopefully people acknowledge the work that we are doing. And of course, the moms, of course, the mothers of the patients, you know, the warriors that are always there outside the health ministry, in the Congress with their kids, you know, on wheelchairs. And we've seen this around the world, that women, the moms of the patients, have been the main activists for medical cannabis. So definitely I would like to see more on this proposed bill that can really help us as women thrive in this industry in a country that's ruled by a lot of macho men.
Yeah, it's something that I've noticed as I've traveled around the world too, is that many of our strongest leaders around the world are women. And I hadn't really planned on highlighting that in this episode, because I think the two of you are just incredibly bold and strong leaders on your own right, whether you're women or not. But let's go there since we've gone there. Abby, what are your thoughts? What's it been like to be a woman in the cannabis industry, both in the prior to licensed market and in the roles that you're in now? How has it been for you?
Yeah, so, you know, I've spent 20 years, as we've said, in this game. And, you know, it hasn't been easy. I'm also disabled. I'm also Jewish. There's like a whole lot of things that make me different than the average bear. The first thing I think I learned was to hold my head high up and just, I guess, not to be crass, but get some balls, right? And just not let anyone push me around, not let anyone bully me. And I've worked in some tough situations with some tough people, and I hold firm and I hold strong. And I think that's what's carried me through in such a difficult industry. And, you know, especially being illegal up until 2 years ago, I was working in the Wild West. Anything could happen. You know, and operating, I operated here, I operated in the Caribbean as well, which is very male dominated culture. And I managed to sort of operate there. And I always was blown that, like, right, I could operate in the Caribbean and be able to be respected in the same level as any man that I dealt with. And if they felt at first that I was beneath them, by the end of the conversation, that feeling went away, and they were like, well, you know, she's serious. But it's, you know, again, it's just, I always say, you know, I do what I do, and I do it in cannabis, right? So it doesn't really matter what industry you're in, right? If you're selling shoes, diamonds, whatever, there's always a level of I guess, disrespect that's going to happen when you're a person that is different or of the sex that's seen as the lesser than, right? And in order to overcome that barrier, and the barriers that I've always had, you know, the barrier of being disabled, the barrier of being a Jewish person, the barrier of not being able to speak English when I first moved to this country. Again, it's a lot of just, it comes from the inside, and leadership and strength come from the inside. So for any woman who's looking to move forward in any industry that is male dominated, or she, you know, or if you feel like you're made to feel lesser than, you are not, and hold that strength and use it to propel you forward, as opposed to letting people put you down and push you down. And that's how you rise to the top, right? And I feel like all the women that I work with now, and all the women that I've worked with over the last 20 years, have led by that essential, right? Of just like rise to the top and don't let yourself get pushed down, because that's someone else's problem. Like their feeling towards women, or their feelings towards a, you know, certain race or sexuality or your disability or whatever it is that they feel makes them better than you, that's their problem. Your problem is to rise above.
I so appreciate that spirit of yours, and that's a spirit that runs through a whole cohort of female activists centered around the Toronto scene who have really inspired me just because they won't compromise. They won't back down. They are who they are, and if you don't like it, too bad. They're just going to keep on moving anyhow. And I love that spirit. You know, one of my hopes is that there are young women who are listening to this podcast, hopefully all around the world, who are looking for a new path in life, a new way to be, and are thinking about the cannabis movement and are thinking about the cannabis industry and are hoping that there might be a place for them. Lorena, what advice do you have for the young women who are listening to this podcast?
Well, in the cannabis space, I mean, if of course they're interested in the cannabis space or they're already in the cannabis industry, just to keep moving forward, perseverance, patience, respect, you know, and always give what you want to receive, right? No matter what you confront or what comes along in your path, but definitely never stop. Anything, it's possible. I never, ever, ever thought that, you know, this Chihuahua girl from Mexico was gonna be now in this position speaking to legislators. I hated politics so much. I never wanted to have anything to do with it. I just wanted to focus, you know, on my company and giving education. But then, you know, destiny just took me different directions until, you know, you accept that it's part of your mission. So definitely have very, very clear, you know, what's your plan, what's your passion, and take that drive until you accomplish what you came to do, no matter what. And yes, of course, we are in a world that's being dominated by men. And let's just, you know, just take a look at the news and what's going on. You know, our world, unfortunately, it's chaos everywhere. So women, you know, it's our time to lead, because men, we love you, Steve, but you guys have been leading, you know, this world for many, many, many years, many generations, and it hasn't worked that well. So it's our turn. It's our turn to show, you know, what we can do as women, moms, you know, this connection, strong connection with nature, with the plant specifically, because I've noticed throughout the years how women connect with the plant so different than men. So I just wanted to say, you know, to all the girls, women out there, that let's work together. You know, let's also stop fighting between each other, because also men tend to say, you know, girls are drama, you know, they're always fighting between each other. You know, that's how they generalize our how we act with other women, and we need to change that as well. You know, we need to work as sisters, as friends. And I've been seeing here in Mexico that the more women come together, things start happening faster. Why? I'm not sure. It's just this drive that we have and this connection, you know, to the earth, and to really wanting to have a better place for ourselves, for our kids. As a single mom, I definitely have as a priority to have put my little granito de arena, you know, the small little stone there, you know, to make this place a better place. So yeah, definitely women, you know, we've seen a lot of changes also around the world. I don't know if you guys saw the manifestation of women in Mexico, that definitely, was a historic day for our country, because we were able to see that transition from the march that we had. We were protesting against feminicidios. How do you say feminicidios?
Femicide.
There you go. So it was more than 100,000 women coming together, as sisters, moms, friends, etc. And we put our country to shake. Men that were looking at this march and all these women, like so passionate and so strong, men were scared. They were stepping back. They were like, holy cow, this is real. Women are out there and they're not gonna stop. So yeah, definitely showing that we can do this without violence, without stepping on other people, without damaging more people that's already damaged in this whole legalization of cannabis. So yeah, just stay strong, keep moving forward.
Well, we did see the marches in Mexico. And I think that the rise of the cannabis plant, the cannabis renaissance, the rediscovery of cannabis, the re-embrace of cannabis all around the world is part of a return to the divine feminine. It's part of getting closer to Mother Earth. It's it's a part of us all coming closer to nature, to starting to understand how to make the goods that we need to live, to move on in the world in a way that doesn't cut down the last tree on the planet. A rising, a return to the divine feminine. And for all of the young women who are listening to this podcast, to you, that means, like Lorena said, your time is now. We need your hearts. We need your souls. We need your brains. We need your strong, resilient, uncompromising, persistent, and bold spirits. Men have been running this world for a long time now, and we are lost. And without you, we will not find our way home. And to the young men who are listening to this podcast, our role now is to support this return to the divine feminine. Our role now is to encourage all other men to respect our sisters, to respect our Mother Earth, to conduct ourselves, to walk in this planet in such a way that brings back life rather than taking it away, as we've done for way too long. We're going to be moving towards wrapping up right now. I'd just like to give each of you an opportunity to let our audience know about any projects that you're working on that you'd like them to know about, any causes that you would like to promote, any other parting words before we move on to the end of the show.
Yeah. So, I'm working really hard to make sure that we get a fair and equitable industry in Canada. I continue my advocacy work from the inside, but then I also work, I've stayed with Normal Canada as an advisor, so I help them through, and I explain policy to them, and I help them think through ideas and how we can move forward on that side. I work with my own team, to make sure that my province of Ontario moves forward in the right way, and I'm proud to be a part of a team that is extremely progressive and is looking to lead the way. So I'm really excited about that. That's a great opportunity for me to move forward. And I want people who look at Canada and say, wow, they did it. Look at it as good, bad, what worked, what didn't, and remember that nothing happens overnight, right? So year one started out, this happened. Year two, progress. And as we move forward, legalization will get better and better and better. So, you know, push forward with your federal legalization initiatives in your own countries. And remember that day one will never be perfect. Year one probably won't be perfect either. But as we learn and grow and understand each other and push forward with what will work, right? And communicate with each other, I think we will see cannabis and drugs in general become legal all over the world. And as the dominoes start to fall, let's make them fall correctly and learn from each other and learn from each government's mistakes. Because once it's legal, it's not going to be illegal again. And that's the best part.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abby. May it all come true. Lorena, we just have a couple of minutes. You want to wrap us up?
Yeah, so we continue with Cannabis Salud as the main cannabis congress in Mexico. This year, 2020, unfortunately, we're not gonna have the congress as we used to every year. We are offering webinars through our platforms on social media. You can follow us on cannabisalud.com. And we also are focusing on a campaign, a communication and political campaign called the Legalization Movement for 2020 MX. Why for 2020? Because for meaning April, the month April, that was the last month the health ministry and the Senate had to publish the regulation and to vote on the law initiative. As I mentioned, because of the pandemic, they had to ask for more time, which for us is just another excuse because the health and economic crisis should be the reason why they, legalize the industry as soon as possible. So just as a reminder, April of 2020 was your deadline and you guys didn't do it. So the legalization movement for 2020, it's just a reminder that we're here. We're not going anywhere until our legislators do their work. And we invite everybody to support this movement by following us on our social media and our website, which is just like that with numbers, for2020.mx. And register, send us your information so you can receive our newsletters, and we're going to be informing everybody about the legislation process. We are very concerned that there are a lot of frauds happening in Mexico. A lot of people saying that there are licenses already, and we've seen public Canadian companies coming to buy these licenses for $1 or $2 million, and they're completely fake. It's false. It's a fraud. And through this movement, we also want to alert people what's really happening in Mexico. And so, yeah, this is the movement that we are putting all of our efforts on. So those are my two projects, Cannabis Salud and the legalization movement.
All right, everybody, you have been warned. If you really want the real deal on what's going on in Mexico, make sure that you tune in to all of Lorena's platforms.
Thank you.
As we say goodbye to these two remarkable activists, I'd also like to take a moment to honor my good friend, Julian Staubs. Jules was one of the people who I encountered in my cannabis career that I just immediately felt extraordinarily close to. He and I really shared the same ideas, the same understanding of cannabis, and went about our work in very similar ways. Sadly, Jules was murdered last Thursday, shortly after I recorded a podcast episode with him on his Hotbox podcast. So our condolences go to his wife, Myrtle, to all of the Fields of Green crew in South Africa, and encourage all of our listeners to send their thoughts about Jules to the Fields of Green family. I hope that you've all been inspired and empowered by this episode of the podcast. 50 years ago, when I started talking about legalizing cannabis, people looked at me like I was crazy. They said that it was just some unbelievable, unattainable hippie dream that was never, ever going to happen. Well, today, cannabis is legal. It's legal in my home state of California. It's legal in Canada. It's legal in many other states in this country. It's becoming legal in Mexico and many other parts of the world. And one day, it will be legal everywhere in this world. And we're going to take the same energy that it took us, it's going to take us to make this big change, to make cannabis legal, and we're going to use that same energy to make sure that the new industry that we create is a just industry, is an equitable industry, is an industry that is diverse, that is an industry that walks on this planet with love and respect. We're going to do that because we're not going to take no for an answer. We're going to bring the same level of persistence and commitment that we took for before legalization as we do to what comes after legalization. And finally, I know that many of you who are listening to this podcast are in challenging circumstances, living in countries where cannabis is still very, very much illegal. You may have to hide your cannabis use from your family, from your friends. You may always live in fear of arrest. But know this, that if you love this plant, if you see her as a teacher and a guide, you are not alone. There are hundreds of millions of us all around the world, and we are coming. Change is coming. We will not stop, and we will not rest until everybody on this planet who needs cannabis has it, and until our last prisoner comes home. Until next time, be well, be free.